Penguin Random House Audio presents The Ruins, a Taskforce story by Brad Taylor. Read for you by Rich Orlow. Chapter 1. Guatemala City, Guatemala. Spring 2011. Pedro Martinez peered through the smoke filling the makeshift workers' bar, trying to penetrate the fog to spot his friend's arrival, or his enemies. He didn't know what they looked like, but he knew his actions would bring them if they discovered what he was doing, both inside the government and out. The ones outside were whom he truly worried about. The government simply followed the money. Even if they pulled the trigger, the money did the killing. He saw the door open, and a man appeared in the gloom. He walked through the smoke, and Pedro thought he recognized his friend. The new arrival approached the bar, then simply leaned against it, glancing around. Pedro stood and waved, and the patron began moving toward him. When the man finally came close enough for Pedro to penetrate the haze, he recognized his friend's face, the forehead and upper lip glistening in a sheen of sweat that was much greater than the heat the bar extracted. Pedro pointed to his seat and said, "Did you get it?" The man glanced left and right, refusing to answer. Pedro said, "Rafael, did you get it?" Rafael focused on Pedro and said, "Yes, I found it, and you were right. But I don't think I want to give it to you. This is very dangerous." "Of course it's dangerous. You knew that. But the dangerous part for you is over. Give it to me." "They will know. They will kill me. They will know." "Not if you did it right. Nobody will know until it's too late. You go back to work tomorrow like nothing has happened, and I'll stop what they're doing. For both of our families, for all of the families they're trampling." Raphael worked for a company called De Gaulle Solutions, a Canadian mining firm from Quebec that extracted gold and silver through open pit mines. Over the course of years, the mining concerns had grown exponentially in Guatemala, the government enamored with the revenue, but the fallout had hit the villages near each of the mines exponentially. Rainforest devastated by the open sores of the mines, destroyed farming and grazing lands, and the toxic runoff all had begun to erode the small villages dotted throughout Guatemala. Then the villagers had begun to fight back, protesting more and more in a feeble attempt to get the government to listen to them. Why were their concerns less important than the mining companies who paid for the mineral rights? Pedro knew the answer. Because of the money. Up until now, the government had been able to prove that what they were doing was for Guatemala's greater good, and that the complaints were from just a few disgruntled farmers. There wasn't any rape of the land. It was all precisely controlled. And then there had been a rumor that De Gaulle Solutions was asking for a mining concession in the Maya Biosphere Reserve, the largest protected rainforest in Central America, a huge tract of land greater than the size of El Salvador. It was in the north of Guatemala, and supposedly had ironclad safeguards. But the money always spoke. Raphael glanced around the room one more time, then pulled out a folded sheet of paper. He passed it across. Pedro opened it, smoothed out the creases, and read an email from the head of De Gaulle's Guatemalan branch to a deputy in the Guatemalan National Council of Protected Areas, the Consejo Nacional de Áreas Protegidas, or CONAP in Spanish. Pedro scanned the letter and saw the details of a bribe if the government would approve a limited search for rare earth metals in the protected lands of the biosphere, an area that was supposedly bulletproof secure from the rapacious beasts that had begun gobbling up Guatemala. Pedro finished reading and smiled, saying, Yes, this is the proof we need. Perfect." Raphael said, "That's not proof. It's simply a piece of paper I printed off. Who's to say you didn't write it?" "But you still have access to the computer servers, right? If we release this, the government will seize those computers, and it will be known worldwide." Raphael scoffed and said, "You are so naive. All you've done is put both of us in danger." Pedro said, "If you believe that, why did you do it?" Raphael didn't answer. He said, "I must go." He stood, and Pedro said, "You did well. Don't worry.
Go back to work tomorrow, and we'll do the rest."
Raphael nodded and rushed out of the bar. Pedro waited a bit, then rose himself, leaving a few bills on the chipped formica table. He waded through the cast-offs of Guatemala City, passing dangerous men who would slit his throat without thinking if it meant a profit. They let him go without a second glance, because he clearly had nothing of value. Not to them, that is. He pushed open the plywood door, failing to notice a man who rose behind him. He stepped into the street and quickly circled around to an alley, not wanting anyone to see which way he left. He glanced back, seeing one man smoking a cigarette outside the entrance to the saloon. He began jogging past the trash piled in the alley, then tripped over something in the darkness, slamming into the pavement on his knees. He looked behind him and made out a figure lying in the grime. He went to it and recognized Raphael, his head bent back, his throat split wide. He leapt to his feet and began backing up, one foot behind the other, until he bumped into another man. He whirled around, and the man said, "You have something that belongs to us." Pedro turned to run back toward the bar, and a hand wound into his hair, jerking his head back and exposing his throat. He felt the lick of the blade, then nothing. Chapter 2. Charleston, South Carolina, Spring 2011. The commencement speaker droned on about sacrifice and the noble pursuit of the greater good, and Jennifer Cahill found her mind drifting. Going back a year, when she'd seen sacrifice for the greater good in a literal sense, when blood had been shed, when she'd confronted risks much greater than the man on the stage had ever experienced.
Maybe Pike was right. Graduation ceremonies are a waste of time.
In her heart, she didn't believe it, simply because she'd worked too hard to be sitting in this chair. Older than most gathered in the shade of the oaks, she had needed 3 attempts to obtain her degree in anthropology, and there was just no way she'd miss walking across the stage, even if there was nobody in the audience to celebrate with her. She thought of her uncle, a professor at the College of Charleston, where she had earned her degree, and the one relative who should have been smiling behind her. But he was dead, murdered in Guatemala on a disastrous quest for a Mayan temple. He was gone, and she had no one else. She wished Pike had had the decency to show up. He knew how much this meant to her, but he'd refused, saying he had something more important to do, something involving a real estate deal he had to close, which was bullshit. He just found ceremonies like this exceedingly boring and was fishing for an excuse. After her experiences with him in Bosnia, she could see why. Anything short of a roller coaster flying off the tracks would be boring to Pike Logan. Despite herself, she grinned, thinking about their experiences. High adventure, as Pike called it. She found herself wondering what she was doing right now. In truth, she thought of him often, much more than she cared to admit, but he was an enigma. She thought he was attracted to her, but he seemed afraid to face that fact, spending his time coaxing her into the gym for a session of hand-to-hand training or driving her to a range to shoot weapons. Like he was petrified of leaving a world he controlled. Then again, she understood, in a sense. He'd lived through the loss of his family, and she knew it still bit deep. They were both damaged goods, and she gave him the space he needed, although he'd really been acting strangely the last couple of weeks. Asking her questions about her future after graduation, and seeming to hang on her answers like it was life or death. The first row of graduates stood up, the females in white dresses and the males in white dinner jackets, and she realized she'd zoned out for the entire speech. Before she knew it, she was across the stage, and the ceremony was over. Graduates ran about, talking to friends or hugging family, and she felt a little lost. She was supposed to have graduated a year ago, and had no friends at the school anymore to celebrate with. They'd all left while she'd been getting shot at in Bosnia. She clutched her bouquet of roses and walked toward the exit of the College of Charleston courtyard, known as the Cistern, dodging families and graduates, feeling.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?